Hello, I'm Tony Frazier, author, blogger, and, well, let's just admit it, near genius. I'd like to talk about a topic that I've addressed from a slightly different point of view a few weeks ago on the blog. I'd like to talk about a character in particular. Characters in comic books aren't like characters, what you think of as characters in other media. A character in a movie or in a book is usually defined, when you think of a character like that, you define them by their personality, by the things they want, by the things they do, by the way they react to things, the things that they hold valuable. In a comic book, because the characters exist for so long, they don't really have any given personality. They have a look that can change over time. They have a name that will sometimes change over time. If it's a superhero, he'll have a given set of powers that can, you know it, change over time. But the personality, especially, changes with every writer depending on what situation the hero finds himself in, what situation or what the character needs to be for that particular book. And as an example, I would like to present Hank McCoy, the Beast. Hank McCoy was introduced along with the rest of the original X-Men in X-Men #1 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in 1963. And in that very first issue, Hank McCoy was basically Ben Grimm without the orange rocks. He used the same New York tough guy speech patterns. He argued with Scott Summers, Slim Summers, over leadership of the group. He had a rivalry going with Bobby Drake, the Iceman, in the same way that Ben Grimm had a rivalry going with the Human Torch over in the Fantastic Four. But he took that even a step further. He was a macho jerk who kissed Jean Grey within moments of meeting her, without invitation, and got flung across the room by her telekinetic powers for his troubles. He was the boor that you, the audience, like to see get his comeuppance. He was Guy Gardner before there was a Guy Gardner. But apparently either Stan Lee or Jack Kirby decided they didn't want to go in that direction. The group didn't really need another version of Ben Grimm. So almost immediately they started changing his character. He acted less like a monkey. He was less abrasive. He was quieter, more mature, and most of all, he stopped talking like a Brooklyn tough guy and started adopting another character mannerism that had been borrowed from the pulps. In the Doc Savage pulps, Doc Savage had a group of assistants, and one of his assistants was a man named Johnny. And Johnny had a very particular way of speaking. He used very big words. And that was the affectation that they decided to give to Hank McCoy. Hank McCoy talked with big words. He was a nerd. He started wearing glasses. He was the nerd who used big words. And he continued that way until the end of his run with the X-Men, until he appeared in a solo series in Amazing Adventures in 1972, at which time he left the X-Men, got a job as a research scientist at a place called the Brand Corporation, I believe, and developed a serum that could mutate people temporarily. When he discovered a group of spies working at the lab, he took the serum in order to disguise himself so that they wouldn't realize that they were fighting Hank McCoy. The serum worked exactly the way he wanted to. It changed his appearance, made him gray and furry and bestial. He beat up the spies, but then he couldn't change back. And at that time, his personality changed almost immediately. In the second issue of his appearance, writer Steve Englehart just kind of hangs a lampshade on the fact that he doesn't want to use all the vocabulary words. He says, "Man, I just don't feel like talking with those big words anymore." Not only that, but he flew into murderous rages. And when he got shot, his bullet wounds would heal instantaneously because he had some kind of accelerated healing factor. And even his hair would sweep up into 2 points at the top of his head. That's right, Hank McCoy was Wolverine before there was a Wolverine. After about 5 or 6 issues, his solo series in Amazing Adventures was canceled, and Hank McCoy moved on to the Avengers. By that time, he was also blue instead of gray. And he was nothing like the murderous, tortured creature that he was in the Amazing Adventures tales. Over in the Avengers, he was the comedy relief. He would sing while he kicked people. He would hang by his toes. He would use puns. He even got himself a catchphrase.
Oh, my stars and garters.
And that was the Beast that a lot of modern fans first remember. Now, after he left the Avengers and joined X-Force first and then went back to the X-Men, he bounced around here and there. Other writers have continued to change his personality, but I've stopped reading comics mostly, so am not as familiar with those changes. I do know that in X-Men Children of the Atom, the miniseries which details the origin of the group, he's presented once again as a completely different person. He's very intelligent and pretending to be a stupid jock at the same time that he's pretending to be a normal human, when in fact he's highly intelligent and a mutant. He projects an image of self-confidence and just kind of natural leadership that you had never seen in his character before. He's not an obnoxious jerk. He's not a big word-using nerd. He's not a guy who flies into murderous rages. He's not a joker. He is now the quarterback. He's the guy all the girls want to date and the guy all the guys want to be. See, my point is not that Hank McCoy is that much different from any other comic character. Every comic character goes through this. It's just that I think his changes have been more obvious and more extreme, so it's easier to detail them. But if you look at another character who was introduced in this same run of Amazing Adventures, you can see someone who went through even more extreme changes. Patsy Walker started out as a kind of an Archie ripoff. She was a teenage girl who had wacky adventures like Betty and Veronica. After a few years, Marvel decided to change her character. They made her a fashion model. She grew up, and her adventures, her stories became more adult romances rather than teenage hijinks. When romance comics kind of went on the skids, Steve Englehart brought Patsy Walker over to Amazing Adventures in his Beast series, where she inherited a costume from another character named Greer Nelson, the cat, who had since mutated and become Tigra. So Patsy Walker became a superheroine, Hellcat. And as Hellcat, she fought as part of the Defenders and the Avengers for a while. Ended up, this teenage comedy Archie ripoff ditzy character ended up being a superheroine married to the son of Satan. I can't think of a more extreme evolution of a character. Well, I can, actually, and that's the sad part. I can. But the point is that this is not an unusual example. This is normal for all comics characters. And I'll be developing this idea and as part of a larger framework that I'll be presenting in. It'll take me several weeks to get it all put together, but I hope you'll stick around with it then. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, on Saturdays on my blog, herogohome.com, I talk about old comics from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, sometimes the 90s. And on Mondays, I cover movies, often with a superhero slant, on Super Movie Mondays. We're currently in the middle of revisiting the XMen series of films. So I hope to see you over there, and if not, well, I hope to see you back here for the next time I do one of these, which I can't say when that'll be. Thank you.